Hi everyone, my name is Sungmin Lee. I'm assistant professor of the landscape architecture program, and I'm so excited to be here today to have an opportunity to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Michelle Kondo. So Dr. Kondo is a scientist with the USDA Forest Service at Philadelphia Field Station. She completed her doctoral training in urban design and planning at the University of Washington and postdoctoral training in environmental health and epidemiology at the University of Pennsylvania. And her research interests generally include, there are many, but environmental strategies for violence, injury, and prevention, environmental health and environmental justice, and geospatial and community-based research methods. And the topic of her today's talk is the place-based strategies for disease, violence, and injury prevention in urban areas. And personally, I'm a big fan of her research, and I was so excited when I was told if I'm able to introduce her to you today. And if you believe it or not, actually I was opening her studies and just ready to citing her to my kind of one of my paper when I received this opportunity. So it's really coincidence, and I was so excited. And thank you for allowing me to introduce her to you. InCHIP, staff and director. And on the final note, she's a fantastic individual, and we are grateful for her presence among us today. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Michelle Kondo.
Thanks very much. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So as Dr. Lee mentioned, I work for the U.S. Forest Service, and I think that not many folks, at least across the country, maybe in this part of the country though, are aware so much about the Forest Service and what we do. A lot of folks have heard of Smokey the Bear, and they, oh yeah, yes, okay, yes, I know the Forest Service now. But I mean, our primary mission is and role is to manage our national forests, which there are about 190 million acres of national forests, and they tend to be actually concentrated in the Northeast. So sometimes this is a surprise. I often think of it's the West, right? The West literally is on fire right now, right? But actually most of the West is grazed land, and actually the highest concentration of forests, national forests, are in the Northeast and in proximity to the most people, even though we may not see or be aware of their presence when in urban areas, in cities. But there are also almost equivalent, almost 170 million acres of forests or trees in cities or urban areas, and this can include suburban and probably exurban areas as well. And although the Forest Service doesn't necessarily own and actively manage these trees and forests, it is our role and it is our purpose to support those resources, as they are and play an important role in the lives of the American public. And so here I am. I was hired to do research to support these resources. And I tend to focus on urban areas and the health of humans, actually, in cities. So let's see. So I'm stationed in Philadelphia. It's one of the largest metropolitan areas in the country. But let's see if I can. Oh, good. Yeah, so place can have a really profound effect on human health in Philadelphia and many cities, post-industrial cities such as Philadelphia. So while some neighborhoods and some aspects of neighborhoods support good health, others really detract from it. And I would say Philadelphia is one of many post-industrial cities dealing with the aftermath of many decades of decline in population and resources, and this has really impacted some neighborhoods and the health of residents of those neighborhoods more than others. And let's see. Talking about housing condition and how it relates to health in particular. So this is just a small list of the many ways in which our housing and housing condition can affect our health. But lead poisoning is a huge one. Other aspects of housing condition, substandard housing condition, which can bring along with it exposure to mold and other allergens. Extreme low and high temperatures, so inadequate insulation, crowding. These are just a few of the ways that our housing condition impacts our health. But thinking just more holistically about neighborhoods and health, I really like to draw from this model by Ana Diaz-Rue because it talks about, this framework includes how did we get here? Why do we have neighborhoods with deteriorated and conditions, and some that are not? And so she talks about it's segregation by race and socioeconomic status and resource inequalities that have led to these inequalities in neighborhood physical and social environments. And I must say that I think that a lot of this segregation that has occurred, largely due to redlining and that historic and current actually persisting system of building inequality along with race. Let's see. So this has resulted in inequalities of the social and built environments, whether it's housing quality, food security, whether you have access to healthy food, availability of parks and green space, crime and safety, or social connections. And these environmental factors are what you might call social determinants of numerous health behaviors and outcomes. So what is the solution? I think it's very important to understand the problems and the root causes, but cities need solutions now. And I really rely on Frieden's, health impact pyramid. So let's see. It's the traditional medical model usually starts with the top, right, where you relies on counseling and education of high-risk individuals. But this approach is often very costly and inefficient. So it's easy to pull individuals aside and say, you really should start eating more healthy, you should start exercising, and you should stop smoking. But it's really difficult to make these changes in our behaviors unless everyone around us is doing the same thing. So I think that there's increasing understanding that it can be more efficient and more effective to change the underlying both socioeconomic conditions, but also the context in which individuals make decisions. We need healthy environments in order to make healthy decisions. So I ask in my research, can place-based and nature-based interventions improve public health and safety? So I'm going to talk about two different types of interventions that I have studied today, pictured here. So one of them having to do with urban, so vacant housing, and the other to do with urban, so vacant lots and greening. So exposure to nature and green space in urban areas. So I've done some research in this area, and I think that the Forest Service is very much interested in this area. But I've found really some good and strong evidence out there about an association between exposure to nature, and whether that be that you live close to a park, or that from a satellite's view your neighborhood is pretty green, right? Related to mortality overall, but also to our stress levels, so which our heart rate might be an indicator of this, our mental health, crime and violence, and so post-operative recovery, so the view from our hospital bed, right, can have a beneficial impact, as well as on our ability to focus and pay attention and on our mood. So I tend to focus my research on interventions. I'm always looking for changes that are occurring in the landscape and in the city, and if ideally on a citywide level. And what types of outcomes? I'm very interested in violence. So this is an issue that is very salient in a city like Philadelphia and other post-industrial cities. And so in a review that I just published last year, we found, well, number one, there have not been very many intervention studies here, but we found most consistent evidence coming from interventions of housing and blight remediation, so buildings and land on violence outcomes. Some evidence that reducing alcohol availability or improving street connectivity and providing more green sort of housing environment also can help reduce violence. So thinking about the issues that Philadelphia faces, and it's not just Philadelphia. I'm working now, and there are cities throughout the U.S. really, but very much concentrated in the Northeast, Midwest, the South, especially dealing with this historic decline in population, sort of an oversupply of housing, and a lot of it tends to be vacant. So Philadelphia has, by some counts, about 40,000 vacant lots. And so 12,000 of them have vacant buildings on them. The rest are just vacant spaces. And there's this phenomena in our city called short dumping, where contractors are dumping, they will dump their construction debris in vacant lots to avoid having to pay for, for that service. So vacant lots, they attract this trash dumping, and then according to residents that live nearby, they attract rodents, which carry pathogens. They attract and host other sorts of illicit activity, and they incite fear and anxiety for people that have to either view or travel by these spaces on a daily basis. And so in Philadelphia, about maybe almost a quarter of them are owned by the city. The rest are privately owned, and Philadelphia is third on the list in terms of abandoned buildings per capita. So this is a major problem and there have been a number of studies that shown that the vacant buildings tend to be sort of hot spots for illegal activity, which may impact negatively the residents that live nearby. The city, Philadelphia, in 2011, they passed an ordinance called the Doors and Windows Ordinance that required property owners to install operating windows and doors on, so for every opening or face penalty, and it was pretty steep. It was something like $200 per opening per day, something like this. But they had to set up an entire separate court system to sort of oversee and adjudicate this new ordinance. So they approached us, and we had about 3 years of data. So this is an observational study where we're looking back, and they wanted to know, did crime rates change around these buildings that were fixed up compared to around buildings that were not. And so we did an observational study. There were almost 1,000 of these violations across the city, across 3 years, and then almost 700 of them that came into compliance. And then there was also a smaller number, almost 300 of them, where the owners went ahead and applied for a permit to renovate the home. And So we also looked at, did crime change sort of in a different way around those homes as well, compared to around control locations where nothing happened. Just to give you an idea of how I built my data set, so I matched up these control and intervention sites, and then I mapped the density of crimes of all different types around throughout the city, and then I took the rate of crime on a yearly basis. Actually, I think maybe it was a every 3 month time unit. So each control and intervention unit received a crime rate for each of these time steps, and then I could compare both before and after the intervention between the treatment and control groups. What sort of difference do we see there? And so this is called a difference in differences approach. But we found a significant reduction around the compliance properties in all crimes, but especially in assaults and gun assaults, as well as in nuisance crimes. I should say we also saw an increase in drug crimes, which is interesting and perhaps not expected, compared to at the control properties. But when we looked at renovation permit properties, we found more and more significant decreases so around these properties in all sort of across the board. And this study was used because the city was taken to court, right? They were sued by property owners. So the ordinance sort of was held up in court for a number of years, and our study was used to help make a case, and successfully they actually won. So this ordinance is now back in effect, and we are actually running my colleagues are running a randomized controlled trial of this intervention as we speak. So how about vacant land? So most of the property in Philadelphia is vacant land is missing a building. So it's just open, and as you saw in the photos, tends to collect trash, and weeds will grow, so overgrown vegetation. The city of Youngstown in Ohio contacted us and said they had started up a program, and they wanted our help to evaluate, see if they were having any effect, or they suspected that they were having an effect on crime and violence in the area. They wanted our help. So again, this is an observational study where we weren't able to, sort of randomize, completely randomize where everything was happening and when, but we could randomly assign controls to each intervention site. So, but there were two versions of this program. One was a sort of traditional clean and green, which you see pictured here on the left, where contractors just come in and just do the work. They're going to remove everything, plant some grass, a couple of trees, and put up a picket fence, which is permeable, so there should be an entrance. People can walk through the lot if they want, but a contractor couldn't dump their construction debris. And there was a second version we called a community reuse lot. So these were residents that applied for support, funding, and guidance to do their own intervention on a vacant lot in or near their neighborhood. And most of them were turned into community gardens or orchards. So here is the map of these interventions. So either the blue or the orange, and the gray points are the control. These are vacant lots. So as you can see, Youngstown has quite a dilemma here with this vacant. It's just pervasive, and so we had many control locations to utilize. But most of these interventions were really focused and targeted in two neighborhoods specifically. And this is something that is quite common. So cities might choose a neighborhood that they feel is showing signs of stability. and wanting to use this investment to support that further development. But it also meant that we had a tricky sort of spatial, analytical task here. How do we tease apart the effects of these things when they're all clustered together? So we had to apply some fancy spatial models, but in the end, we found, and here we actually tested for displacement. I'm going to talk about that in a second. We found significant reductions in property crimes more around these traditional clean and green lots, as opposed to significant reductions mostly in violent crimes around the community reuse lots. And we tested for displacement, so there's this question, are we just pushing crime and violence sort of away from these interventions? And using our models, we did not find sort of this and sort of an increase in areas, away from our interventions. And in fact, we found a decline. So it was a decrease that persisted over space. So based on and drawing from a history of more observational studies and some small sort of pilot experimental studies, about 5 or 6 years ago, my colleagues and I, and this is led by Charles Brannis, he's now at Columbia University, began a prospective, citywide or a cluster randomized controlled trial of this vacant lot intervention in Philadelphia. And so this is always the goal, to run an experimental study where we could randomize which locations received which treatment. And so we had, the goal was to have 600, right, in each group. And so 200 would receive this traditional clean and green. The second would be sort of a partial treatment where contractors come and just pick up trash and mow. And then a third, which is the controls. So they receive nothing. And so throughout a 38-month study period, and we collected the crime data from the police, but we also went out and surveyed residents and asked them just, everything about themselves and their health and their community, their neighborhood, their mental health. What did they think about their neighbors, and were they afraid to go out? Things like this. So we had, I'll show you, actually, I brought some photos, before, after photos, and to show you what this intervention looks like in Philadelphia. So here's a map of the interventions. You can see they're very much sort of randomly distributed throughout the city, and when on paper, when we are in the numbers, when you compare their socioeconomic variables, they were very much balanced in terms of those elements. And so we wanted to make sure that we were comparing oranges and oranges, right? So looking at our primary outcome, which was crime and violence, we found significant reductions overall, but found a 29% reduction in gun violence, and then 22% in burglaries, and also in nuisance crimes, and especially in neighborhoods below the poverty line. Looking at the survey data, we found significant reduced perceptions of crime. So this perhaps speaks to some of the mechanism. Why are we seeing these changes in crime levels? We saw reduced safety concerns, so people felt more safe to go out, and they also reported increased use of outside space for relaxing and socializing. Again, this could be one of the mechanisms. And we also, so looking at this survey data, again, there were almost 450 participants that we surveyed that lived near an intervention lot or a control lot. We focused in on this analysis on mental health outcomes, and we found a significant decrease in depression and feelings of worthlessness as well. So for people that lived near the intervention. And I do want to say I'm running some additional analyses on these data to test with, even though we were not powered actually to do this, but is the same, where are we seeing the same effect for men versus women? And actually, I'm finding that for women, I mean, this is all under review, but we found that women were more afraid to go out, especially after dark, after the intervention, compared to men. Men felt much safer, and women felt much less safe, which is interesting. And speaking to the ethnographers that spent time, so this was another arm of the study about what is going on. It could have to do with the fact that some of these lots after the intervention became places for people and perhaps young men to gather, which is great, right? But may play into fear and perceptions of safety in terms of traveling throughout the neighborhood for women. But I think there's more to be tested there, and think about, are these effects, is this just a blanket effect, or are we seeing different experiences for different social groups? And then thinking more, we also want to know how and why are we seeing these effects that we see. And I like to also, as well as looking at violence, I like to think about stress as a sort of physiological mechanism between, response to our environment and physical health outcomes. So this is a diagram by Terry Hardig, and talking about, how do we get between this nature exposure and, health and well-being outcomes. How and why are we seeing these associations? And he talks about, 4 mechanisms where there is some pretty solid evidence, being air quality, physical activity, social contact. So we tend to relate and spend time or connect with our neighbors more when our environments are more green, as well as stress. So we feel more calm in greener environments. And so I've spent some time thinking about this. So how do we measure this? And so I'll share with you one study. And this was actually a pilot study that conducted led by Gina South. She's at UPenn in emergency medicine. But she recruited, and her group recruited residents in 2 different neighborhoods to take a walk around their block. And this is both before and after an intervention happened. And again, this is a clean and green intervention of vacant lots. So you can see the 3 vacant lots that were cleaned and greened here. And at the control site, the vacant lots, the study lots, nothing happened to them. They stayed vacant. But I calculated using GIS, and I'm sure this is just an estimate of the view shed of when participants were or could be in view of these vacant lots. And we asked them to wear heart rate monitors as they were taking their walk. So these are the routes. So for example, someone would take this route here. And so we could compare then on average heart rate when in view of the green lots versus in view of vacant lots or nothing, or not. And we found significantly lower heart rate when for the intervention group. So when comparing heart rates before the intervention and after the intervention in the same places versus not much change at the control site. And so I would like to do also more of this type of research to understand whether and if interventions like this can and how can have an impact on the health of residents, many of whom suffer from sort of chronic stress response and endocrine systems that are sort of out of balance. We have calculated return on investment of this type of intervention based on the estimates from our research. And so, for example, for this the vacant lot remediation that occurs in Philadelphia, so looking at returns that you would get from reducing firearm violence or non-firearm violence. And this comes from economic impacts from a shooting injury, right? You lost days of work and impacts on the individual, not only based on hospital costs, but court system costs and all of these things. So we know that one of these lots costs about $1,600 plus about $200 per year in maintenance. We found $26 in net benefits to taxpayers and over $300 to society at large for every dollar invested in this program. And I'm glad to say that before these studies were happening, that the funding for this type of program was very shaky, and it was very much often threatened to be cut or reduced. But we last year, for about I'm not sure how long, but they had about a $3 million budget from the general fund to run this program last year, increased by almost $2 million. So we have a larger budget to run the program, and so we're seeing some positive effects there. We're running other intervention studies and thinking about other types of violence, so intimate partner violence in New Orleans, and family violence also, and youth violence. Youth violence is the focus in this study run out of University of Michigan, in Flint, Youngstown, and Camden, so sort of 3 mid-sized cities. And other studies are in development in other cities, but there is just a wide range of needs in dealing with this particular issue. I also think about, what tools do the actors, the cities, the nonprofit groups, and that are actually doing this work, what is it they need other than some evidence that they're having an impact? So I'm also we've just run a national survey of this type of organization. Land banks are included. They need to know, we want to know more about them. So how are they funded? What are they? How do they relate to and engage residents? So like we saw in Youngstown, we saw sort of different impact there depending on degree and level of engagement of residents and ownership, right? What tools do they need, and what is the return on their investments? The Forest Service also is interested in providing these types of tools. So just a little plug for the Vibrant Cities Lab that we've helped construct. And so you can just see some of the types of, so this is providing, quick research, evidence, right? But there are other tools there for groups that are doing this type of work. So thanks. I'm happy to talk about anything related to my work, as well as as a Forest Service scientist, I have a sort of maybe non-traditional, although I don't know if it's okay to say traditional. So there are more PhDs out there than there are academic positions, and so there are different things to consider. But as a Forest Service and a federal scientist, I can speak to this particular career path that I've taken, which I don't know if you can call it a path, but paved my own path of my own. Happy to talk about that with any of you. Oh yeah.
It's a great path to take. So we have very interesting ideas for your interventions. One question I have: what are your controls? And the traditional question of contamination in our cities, especially when you do it in the neighborhood, which there are pros and cons. I know from my own research, but if you can speak how you have taken care of those in your research.
Sure. So something that we do, I mean, when we're talking about vacant lot interventions, the controls are, this is one example, but you saw the three before and after. So the before photos, those are the controls, and so we make sure that they remain vacant throughout the study period. And of course, in some cases, that making sure isn't 100%, but so we go out and record, and we will adjust for. So right, this might be a control. It might look like that, but we would run adjusted analyses for contamination. And another thing that we do is we make sure that the matched lots are not too close together. So we have a distance criteria, but we also match them within sections of the city. So you can see these sort of dashed lines on the map here. And we won't match something in the northeast with something in the southwest, just because you have different development patterns and all of this. So that's another thing that we do. Yeah.
Yeah, I have actually two questions in relation to that one. Actually, I'm curious that, so those the effect of the kind of place intervention on preventing crime might be different if those interventions occurred in locationally clustered or independently located. So that means some intervention places located within some neighborhoods, those are occurred 5 or 6, and they might have some clustering effect in preventing crime compared to those occurred in something located in some very independent location. So,
yes. In fact, sorry. In fact, so we did take a clustered approach, and each intervention site was a number of parcels sort of clustered together. Yeah, and then so each of those clusters needed to be a certain distance away from one another. Yeah.
And second one is actually, I'm also interested in walkability study, and always when we do that kinds of intervention, place intervention, the criticism is a kind of gentrification.
Yeah.
When we kind of develop a walkable environment and this kinds of place intervention, then we kind of relocate low-income people to another neighborhood and another space.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the crime, actually, when we create a better environment, then although the crime incidence may be decreasing that space, but somehow those strangers move to next neighborhoods to make some crime. So have a chance to kind of consider that issue. I'm not sure how to control, but at least once we convince them, effect of place intervention, we also need to consider maybe to total crime within the whole city.
Sure. Yeah, so there are some ways to do that. I mean, now in all of our studies, we test for displacement. So whether the outcome we're interested in, the crime is just being pushed and sort of increasing around our outside of our clusters. So in this one, we did not find evidence of that. But talking about displacement, so the intent of this intervention is to support redevelopment, right? From the city's perspective, they want somebody to come and buy these lots and to build a house or something on them. And that may spell rising property values, which could, displace residents. And so what we know is, it's looking at, over time, that only about 10% of these lots have been sold and redeveloped. So this intervention is turning into sort of a permanent land use, whether by intention or not. And but I share this question, and many share this concern too, that whether improving neighborhoods and improving in this regard, is it causing displacement? And I would say I'm very interested in looking at post intervention change in ownership and or some turnaround of residents. But we don't have the data to be able to answer that question here. So I'm looking actively for a location that has adequate data for us to be able to test that hypothesis. But yeah, should these programs be paired with some sort of mechanism to try to keep reduce to keep housing affordable for existing residents? So more to think about there.
Yeah, it's a really interesting presentation. Do you have some theory if crime isn't moving elsewhere and it's truly reducing crime? What is the mechanism by which that is happening? Like why is improving the environment, vacant lots, etc., reducing crime?
So we can talk, so there's situational crime theory, which, speaks to crimes as sort of a perfect storm. And if you remove one of those ingredients, being this opportunistic or opportunity providing environment, that even if you have a motivated perpetrator and a vulnerable victim or person, that it won't happen. And this said, many of these crimes that we're talking about are actually increasing as a whole throughout the city. So some of these relative reductions might be just a lower increase, right? So it's difficult to say, is there a theory that speaks to this? But I'd say that's certainly one of them. And broken windows theory as well, not the policing theory, but the theory of there was a randomized controlled trial published in Science. So I think maybe it was in Amsterdam, so somewhere in the Netherlands, where they tested, had people pass through environments that had been vandalized or that looked in certain ways, and indeed the vandalized environments encouraged, or people felt encouraged to further vandalize those environments. So it's not that this is a crime that has to happen. It's the environments are playing are an important and necessary ingredient to these crimes that occur.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's things like people are outside more because they have green space.
Oh, sure.
Less likelihood of crime, or people are more proud of living there and more likely to be involved and report. All those things.
Sure.
Really,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, more people, more eyes on the street, and environments that look like they're cared for. Also, can have an impact. So whether somebody perceives that there's a presence here, that somebody cares about the space, we've found, I mean, right.
I did a lot of work a long time ago and wrote 5 editions of an environmental psych textbook.
Yeah.
And environments provide cues for what is appropriate behavior in them, and they also provide information to the people residing in the area about how they're valued and that kind of thing, and that can have an impact on behavior. There were studies also with littering. When you have no litter, you continue to have no litter. As soon as there's one piece of litter, you start to get more. So it's interesting. Actually, important cues that are given by environments that can have a role in dictating behavior.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so we draw a lot from environmental psychology. That theory comes. You've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I think this study is great. It's really inspiring since we kind of have the similar situation in Hartford, which is also a post-industrial city. I'm just wondering about the time sequence about the study. So I know you randomly sample the control vacant lots, but how about the greening and the cleanup ones? Because I know Philly has the land care program, so the city did that. Or you just pick their sites, or you like a quasi-experiment to actually green them and experiment?
Yeah, so this one, we've taken multiple approaches. So until this randomized controlled trial, we were using a quasi-experimental approach where we just studied the lots that land care lots that had already been done in the past. But this one, we worked with PHS, which is the Horticultural Society, and we told them which lots should receive this land care treatment. And they said, okay,
Does it involve some like collaboration?
Yes, collaboration and coordination with this nonprofit group. And yeah, I mean, this is one of the major challenges of doing this type of intervention work is you have to have really strong, solid relationships with the groups that are, and institutions and agencies that are doing this work.
So when you choose the green site, did you do like stratified sampling? Because looks like the point of the north part, I feel like, as far as my knowledge, I feel like maybe north part has more problem. But your point is more like in downtown. Like, did you consider the socioeconomic, thing of the neighborhood when you choose the site?
So you will see some bare spots here. So this is the upper northeast and the south. So this is the refinery. This is more I guess higher resource neighborhoods or newer. So there's not as much vacancy up there. So it had to do with the density of the vacant spaces, and you also don't see too many in the center city, right? This is the financial area, and not too much vacancy there. Yeah, so it had to do with just the availability or supply of vacant spaces. But yeah, North Philadelphia here. This is Temple University. We didn't want to just concentrate on one area where we knew there were problems of one kind or another. Sure.
You mentioned about the type of intervention, which seems to be just clearing and kind of taming that lot.
Sure.
But I'm wondering, with similar to the Youngsville example, if you had any cases where you're dealing with actual stormwater management sites and within these vacant lots or opportunities for the city to do some stormwater and do some environmental approaches, and how or if those differ, the perception from the town or the people that live adjacent to them differ. Because I know there's studies in Georgia, for example, thinking through the approaches for stormwater, there's a lot of native grasses and it kind of looks a little fuzzy, and people change their perceptions towards green space because they feel like that's kind of an untamed looking environment.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you found that in your study as well.
I know, that's interesting. So none of these parcels were provided any stormwater management. Intentionally. Yeah, and that is a fairly new area. It's only been in the past about 3 years that the city started looking at vacant parcels as candidate sites for green stormwater infrastructure, and these are on that 25% city-owned. They're looking for all low-hanging fruit. The issue is in Philadelphia, the parcels are small, and so even if 3 clump together adjacent, you still can't build a large enough system to be able to manage the runoff from even just the street, adjacent street. So there are challenges there. But when we're talking about Flint, or even Youngstown, the lots there are larger. There are more opportunities, and I think they are. But there haven't been any evaluations looking at the changes on social patterns, or behaviors, outcomes. Comparing the green infrastructure sites versus the grass and a tree. But I know there are so many folks interested in, can vacant lots provide biodiversity? Pollinator gardens they're installing in some of these, and what impact on health do those interventions have compared to the standard grass, the turf?
And even from the urban climatology standpoint, there's studies looking at the contiguity of these open spaces and the capability of reducing kind of the thermal aspects of urban environments, and rather than the approach that has been from the urban planning standpoint to kind of limit the more the vegetation towards the edges of cities, the ability to use these vacant lots as places where you're kind of puncturing through the density and allowing the city sort of to breathe as well. So that would be another kind of health.
Yes.
Social.
I know. Urban ecology, urban health coming all together. Yeah, thanks.
I have a short comment and a question, continuing Deb's question. One of the studies show that the community reuse lots have shown a better or stronger effect on reducing violence than the other intervention arm. And I think I've seen these kinds of studies. We publish something like this. Is it possible that something about the community sense of belonging or bonding or neighborhood cohesion, something about the people identifying or feeling different in that more members of that community can be mediating these or explaining these kinds of effects? Have you measured something related to that?
In this study, we did not measure it, but in this, the University of Michigan, the Youth Violence Prevention Center, the study going on in Flint and Youngstown and now Camden, we are measuring that. Yeah, so we would like to be able to understand if that's a mediating factor or. Yeah.
In this case, it's a good candidate because one intervention arm, there was someone from outside coming in. Versus us doing something for ourselves.
Right.
Yeah, so if I'm correct, when you were reporting the findings from the observational studies, I think it was the abandoned building remediation. Am I right that there was an increase in drug crime? And then I think on the raining the vacant lots, there was an increase in motor vehicle theft.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on this?
Oh gosh, well, yeah.
I wasn't supposed to point that out.
So yeah, in Youngstown, which was the contractor versus community lot, we did see increase in motor vehicle theft, significant across at both sites, which we thought, what is it that? So perhaps it could be that people feel more safe to park their cars in front of vacant lots if they're cleaned up, and maybe they become a target. That could happen. We know that vacant lots sort of play a part in this sort of whole ecology of things. So in Philadelphia, we found that people were, or that people park their cars in front of vacant lots and stash their weapons in them. So we wondered why a reduction in violent crimes. Is it that people are stashing their guns in these overgrown vacant lots? No, they're stashing them in cars parked in front of the vacant lots, and that this intervention it disrupted that. So we have cars, yes, cars, no. It was changing the way people are parking their cars. That's one possible mechanism there. And then, so about drug crimes, and that one is a question mark. Yeah. But we may be able to answer that in results from the randomized controlled trial.
Wonderful talk, really, really fascinating.
Thank you.
Just occurred to me that one possible explanation for the increase in car theft could be that if the roads become more passable with the greening efforts that are going on, that maybe it's easier for cars to get away. We have a colleague in LA who's talked about the fact that it's very easy to get quickly to a highway where you can be far away in a few minutes, and that really is part of the reason why they have a lot of problems with car theft.
Yeah. So street connectivity, and there have been studies of this. If you, that could be one element.
All your ethnographers.
Yes, again. Very useful to have some ethnographers involved in these types of projects.
That's a very interesting talk. I have a question about the morphology of the vacant lot itself. So I know you want to pair with your controlling and treatment site. Was size of the vacant lot was also the factor when you're selecting the site? Because if we have a larger site, in different contexts of the neighborhood, maybe the result might differ. So I just want to know if there's any factors in there, the size and maybe neighborhood context or intersection context that can actually impact.
Oh, sure. I mean, we definitely considered this. I mean, we had strict criteria about which lots we were, and the characteristics of the clusters. How much occupied housing there needed to be, and how many adjacent vacant parcels, and we had really a lot of criteria for that selection. But you're right. I think the surrounding neighborhood context can play a role there, probably in ways that we don't know, but we're getting closer towards understanding those things.
Because there is one case I know that there is an intersection with one corner with police station. But still there's a crime on the diagonal.
Maybe it can
be some viability of how important the vacant lot property would be.
Yes.
You're talking about your unique path to kind of working in Forest Service. I was wondering, how did you even think to get involved, especially where you end up in this line of work within it? Why Forest Service?
Why the Forest Service? That's a good question, and sometimes I wonder, was it really intentional? I had my job for a couple of years, and my mom, we were sitting at the dinner table. My mom says, "Isn't it funny? Your grandmother, my mother, was a secretary for the USDA, and her father was a ranger in the national, forest." I'm like, "Why didn't you tell me this? I had no idea." So it comes full circle, perhaps. But it was just a lot of networking. So I started off with a postdoc at Penn, and it was sort of an odd postdoc. I came with a little funding, and I came without a mentor. So I had some time to just go out and network and look for mentorship and look for collaborators and partners. And I just did so many cold calls and informational interviews, and I had this interdisciplinary background with some training in urban ecology, and so I understood a lot about environmental systems, but I could speak a little bit of epidemiology and public health. And so putting yourself in that place where you might be viewed as a good translator is, I think people value that. And I met the coordinator of the Philadelphia field station, and she had met somebody in the epi department, so my future mentor, and they had this idea, but no one to carry it out. Or they had a an idea that I helped execute and help shape. So I was seen as an opportunity to help move that idea forward. So it's a little bit of circumstance, but a lot of just putting yourself out there and sort of being at the right place at the right time.
Seems like it's time, so thank you for...
Sure, thank you. Thanks for all great questions.